Welcome to Coach's Read, and today I'm going to be reading Help, I'm Trapped in My Gym Teacher's Body by Todd Strasser. Now this is a chapter book, so it's going to be broken up into about maybe 4 videos. So if you want to see what happens next, just click on the next video. Chapter 1. Here he comes, Julia Sachs whispered. Everyone at our lunch table looked up. What amazing muscles, said Amber Sweeney. She was talking about our new gym teacher, Mr. Braun, who had just entered the cafeteria. Because he was new that year, he had gotten stuck with lunch duty. What a hunk, Julia said dreamily. What a freak, countered Josh Hopka. Mr. Braun was the most muscular person we had ever seen in real life. His arms and chest bulged through his dark blue polo shirt, stretching the material tight. His neck was like a tree trunk, and you could see the ripples in his stomach through his shirt. He's a natural, I said. A freak of nature, Andy Kent summed it up. Josh and I smiled. We watched as Mr. Braun caught a glimpse of his reflection in the cafeteria window. He flexed his right arm, making the muscles bulge even more. I was certain his shirt sleeve was going to rip, but it didn't. Oh, my hero, Alex Silver whispered in a high falsetto. The guys chuckled, but Julia Sachs narrowed her big brown eyes at us. You're just jealous, she said. No way, Josh insisted. You think I want to be a musclehead? Forget it. He turned to me. What about you, Jake? Instead of answering, I glanced over at Amber, who was still gazing at Mr. Braun. Amber had long, straight brown hair and smooth, flawless skin. She was really pretty. See? Julia smiled knowingly. Jake wouldn't mind looking like that. Amber turned and caught me with her almond-shaped green eyes. I quickly looked away. Recent surveys show that big muscles are the #1 cause of stupidity, Andy announced. He was using the end of a plastic straw to pick some gunk out of his braces. That's a good one, Amber giggled. I'm serious, Andy insisted. The brain has to work so hard to control those muscles that it doesn't have room to think. Everyone scowled at him. Andy was tall with short black hair. He often said weird things. We never knew whether he was serious or not. You know what they say, I added. Those who can do. Those who can, do. Those who can't, teach. And those who can't teach gym. Amber laughed, revealing her straight white teeth. I felt good when I made her laugh. Watch this, Alex whispered to us. He waved his arm. Hey, Mr. Braun. What's up, Silver? The gym teacher stepped up to our table and crossed his massive arms. He had a deep, husky voice and a square face with short, black hair. It was only 11:30 in the morning, but his jaw was already darkened by stubble. How long does it take to grow all those muscles? Alex asked innocently. Josh sniggered silently. Andy covered his mouth with his hand and tried not to laugh. Mr. Braun didn't notice. I started lifting when I was 14, he replied. Just about your age. How often? Alex asked. 4 or 5 days a week? Wow. Alex pretended to be impressed. How many hours a day? 2 or 3 at least. We traded amazed looks. It was hard to imagine doing anything for 2 or 3 hours a day, except maybe watching TV. How come so much? Asked Alex. You have to work on all the major muscle groups, Mr. Braun explained. It's not just having big muscles. It's about symmetry and cuts. What's that? Andy asked. Symmetry means having a balanced physique, Mr. Braun explained. It looks bad if you have big pecs and no traps. Cuts mean muscle definition. You want to see each individual muscle. Oh, I get it. Alex gave an exaggerated nod. From the tone of his voice, we knew he was getting ready to deliver the zinger. But here's the thing I don't get, Mr. Braun. How come you can't find any clothes that fit? Chapter 2. Julia Sachs looked away so Mr. Braun couldn't see her face. I bit down on my lip to keep from laughing out loud. Josh and Andy clamped their hands over their mouths and made funny, muffled noises as if they could hardly control themselves. Mr. Braun's face hardened. His eyes became beady. He just realized that Alex was goofing on him. This is the largest size this shirt comes in, Silver, he replied icily. He glared down at Alex and the red lunch tray in front of him. French fries, chocolate pudding, and lemonade. Is that your lunch? Uh-huh, Alex grinned if he were proud. Mr. Braun raised a disdainful eyebrow. That's what I call a real healthy diet, Silver. I couldn't help chuckling. Unfortunately, Mr. Braun saw me. What's so funny, Sherman? Nothing, Mr. Braun. Braun, it's just an honest mistake, but everyone at the table stared at me. What is that thing on your tray? Mr. Braun asked. A potato? I said. This year the school had added a potato bar at lunch. What's on it? Melted cheese, pineapple, and bacon bits. Mr. Braun made a face like he wanted to hurl it, then shook his head in disgust. You kids eat the worst garbage I've ever seen. I won't be surprised if your bodies fall apart by the time you're 50. That's cool, Alex replied defiantly. Life's over by then anyway. You won't feel that way in 26 years, Mr. Braun said. Chapter 3. After Mr. Braun left, Alex turned to us with a puzzled look on his face. In 26 years, I'll be 40, not 50. He probably meant 36 years, Amber said. I said, then you'd be 50. Alex shook his head in disbelief. Can't the guy add? His brain doesn't have room to add, Andy said as he popped a couple of Skittles into his mouth. He's too busy telling all those muscles what to do. Give it a rest, Andy, Julia groaned. Hey, talk about no room for brains, Josh looked up the table. Here comes Barry Dunn. A chill went through my spine. Coming towards us with a big kid wearing a baggy green t-shirt and black jeans with white patches on the knees, except his head was shaved almost completely bald, except for one long blonde lock that grew from the back of his skull down between his ears. Earrings dangled from both ears. His deep-set eyes were focused directly on me. Better hide, Jake, Josh warned in a low voice. For some reason, which no one understood, Barry Dunn hated me and picked on me constantly. If Amber hadn't been sitting at the table with us, I probably would have hidden, but I didn't want her to think I was a chicken. As Barry came closer, the kids at the tables around us grew quiet. Everyone in school was afraid of Barry. They all watched as he came around our table and stood behind me. I braced myself for a major knuckle noogie or a super painful shoulder tweak. Instead, Barry bent down and growled into my ear. Behind the garage in 10 minutes. But it's cold out, I whispered back. It was the first week of December. Barry dug his index finger and thumb into my shoulder muscle. 10 minutes or die. Okay, I jerked my shoulder away. Barry turned and went out the cafeteria doors. Everyone at the table stayed quiet for a moment. Josh pursed his lips. Amber looked away as if trying to spare me any more embarrassment than necessary. Alex gave me a commiserating look. It's been nice knowing you, Jake. Chapter 4. 4.5 minutes later, I dropped my uneaten baked potato into the garbage. After that visit from Barry, I lost my appetite. Want us to come with you? Alice asked as we dumped our lunch trays. I shook my head. It'll just get him mad. If you're not back in 5 minutes, I'm telling Mr. Braun, Josh said. 5 minutes with Barry Dunn was an eternity. If he felt like it, he could do a lot of damage in that much time. I left my friends and went out through the cafeteria doors. Outside, it was cold, a cold, dreary day. The grass was covered by a thin film of frozen dew, and the sky was a solid blanket of gray. It felt like it was going to snow. Wearing only a long-sleeved shirt, I shivered and watched my breath turn into white vapor. The garage at the Burt Itchup Middle School, we called it Burp It Up, was a low gray building on the other side of the bus circle. Dirtbags like Barry and his buddies went there to torture kids like me. Crossing the bus circle alone, I felt like I was walking down death row. Barry and a couple of his friends were waiting back there. One of his friends was wearing a black football jacket, the other wearing a gray sweatshirt. Barry was wearing a t-shirt. His bare arms had turned red in the cold, and he had to show everyone how tough he was. The first thing he did was blow an air hanky, alternately holding one nostril closed while snorting out the other. I had seen him do that before. It must have been a newly acquired skill. He wiped his nose with his bare arm to clean up any nasal residue, then slid his right foot forward. The laces of his untied shoe hung down in the dirt. Tie it. I stared down at his shoe. Barry loved inflicting humiliation as much as he did pain. From deep inside, I mustered just enough courage to say, tie it yourself. Barry squinted at me. I didn't hear you good. Well, that's not quite right, I said, desperately trying to stall. Actually, you didn't hear me correctly. Huh? Barry's forehead wrinkled. He wasn't the smartest kid in the world. In fact, some kids called him the dunce behind his back. I didn't hear you good is bad English, I explained. I don't care what language it is. Barry made a fist. Tie it or die. The situation looked bad. If I didn't think of something fast, I would have to choose between humiliation or a severe beating. You know what worries me, I asked. Now what? Barry snapped impatiently. Making me tie your shoes sort of implies that you never learned to tie them yourself. Barry frowned. Get off it. I turned to his dirtbag buddies. Every time you see him, his laces are untied, right? They nodded. Barry never tied his shoes. The laces were always flopping loosely on the ground. Barry turned to his friends, who were now giving him funny looks. Oh, come on, he sputtered. You know I can. His friends didn't look convinced, so Barry kneeled down and tied his own shoe. Then he looked up. See? Knew you could do it. I gave Barry a wink and started back toward the cafeteria. Okay, so that's all for today. We will go with chapter 5 on the next video.